It's, I mean, one of the things that really fascinates me as well is this idea of, if that's what they're doing, they must have a lot of fuel already. Somewhere in your life, there must be traumatic experiences, traumatic events, stuff that they
Yes.
feed off of, and they can
Yes.
collect and, you know, and
Yes.
collate and use for them. So I think, you know, going from a traditional psychotherapy point of view, if you can actually explode the trauma and normalize it and say it was just life, it just happened, then that cuts off a source of their fuel.
Yes, and that's where they can be useful, because they are part of the one.
Right.
You know, they are all part of the one. They have just as much right to be here, I guess, as we do. I mean, they have life. They are entities of parasitic entities like leeches. You know, so it's like, but people don't realize they're feeding off them. You know, and they hit everybody. They hit everybody to different degrees. I don't know how many times I've been walking down the sidewalk and this horrible thought would come to mind. You know, so they feed off of your source, your psychological source that you buried alive. You know, that you have not dealt with, you have not forgiven yourself for, you haven't forgiven somebody else for. It's something that you don't want to deal with, and you buried alive, and they see it, and they they have brought up, patients have told me that they have brought up memories that the patient himself had long forgotten, you know, and went and dredged it up and said, hey, look what you did, you know, back then. And it could be something as bad as little as, you never paid George back that dollar you borrowed from him, man, you're a crook. So anything they can put in your head that will generate negative emotional energy, they will do that. They could care less about you. You're their cow. And the only way they can get that energy, they can't make it themselves. They have to take it from you and convert it to negative before they can pull it out of there.
I believe as well in that you've used, my speciality in my career has been chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is this chronic fatigue that affects people systemically, and sleep, nothing, you know, helps them recover. What I've noticed in common, not with everyone, but in common with many, is this traumatic element to their childhood. Either they were colluding in some kind of family secret, or they were privy to information they shouldn't have had, or they were beaten, or they were locked
sexually
up.
molested, or you know, there's some trauma there.
Usually there's a trauma, and you know, as a result, the individual finds themselves constantly looking for approval and acceptance, because they're in a state of alarm, trauma, and a child needs security, it needs safety. So it's constantly looking for, how do I get what I need? The approval, the acceptance, the love, you know, how do I get this? And they kind of contort themselves into all kinds of weird shapes, and, you know, so that they can get what they need. But the trauma's never dealt with.
Right. So they view the world through their source.
Through their...
They view the world through their source, through their psychological damage. The whole world is colored by that perception.
Exactly.
And that in turn attracts these things to that frequency. So they can be very useful if you realize that they're pushing your button, and that button is linked to an unresolved trauma within yourself. You know, and that happened to me just not long ago. I was out in the backyard, and I got my dog is a beautiful white husky, you know, fluffy, beautiful husky, and she was following me around the backyard. And out here in the desert, we don't cut grass. We go out with a machete and cut cactus. You keep the cactus down there, and they're taking over the whole world. So here I am with this machete back there, and she runs up. She hadn't done anything that bad or anything that irritated me. And here's this thought comes into my head: cut her head off. Like, what? Where did that come from? That wasn't me. That wasn't my thought. You know, I'm like, and then I step back and I'm watching the repercussions of that thought. It was like somebody threw a rock into a calm stream or a calm pond, and here's all these ripples. How could you dare think something like that? That's shameful. That's awful. That's shocking. I mean, there's all these negative ripples from that one thought that I knew didn't belong to me. And it's like, how can I even think? And then I go, well, yeah, I know that wasn't me. And then I'm watching all these negative repercussions that I'm reacting to from that thought. And it was all negative emotional stuff. And then I'm going, okay, what is it in me that's unresolved where this thing was able to just zoom in and push that button and get that massive reaction out of me? I know I would never cut the dog's head off. I would never do that. I wouldn't even think about it on my own. It wasn't my intent. I didn't. It was like, how could I even harbor such a thought? So I'm going, okay, what is it in there that made it so easy for this thing to just zip in there and push that button and then get this massive negative reaction from me that I was watching and watch it roll off. And I'm like, look at all that negativity that's just from that one thought that took a split second. And I'm going, what is it in there? So I'm tracing it back, and what is it between me and animals? So, I mean, have I ever done anything bad to an animal that would trigger? And I went, yeah, there was. And it was something that, until just recently I never told anybody about. It's like when I was 6 or 7 or something, I was shooting a bow and arrow in the backyard, and the cat, our pet cat, kept running in front of the target. And I'm like, real frustrating. I'm like, well, okay, I'm going to teach it a lesson. So I had this big box on the ground with the target on it. I said, well, I'll 6 or 7 year old not thinking straight. I'll put the cat in the box, and then I'll shoot at the top and show him how dangerous this is and maybe scare him away. So put him in there, and I'm thinking, oh, he'll never reach high enough to, be hurt by the thing. Well, it turns out that what he did is he stretched out on the inside of that thing. I didn't know it. I shot the arrow, went through it, and it hit him in the eye. It knocked out his eye. When I walked up there, I mean, here's this gooey mess, and his eye was all shot out, and I'm horrified. I'm absolutely horrified. I mean, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I couldn't tell anybody. Told my parents they'd probably beat the hell out of me. And the cat was like, frantic, and like it was horrifying. It was absolutely horrifying. It was traumatic. And I couldn't tell anybody. I kept that inside on my own for years. I never told anybody about that. It was just there festering. And I watched that cat, and it kind of pulled away from the family and went rogue, and it stayed on its own, and it was like a feral cat, and I'd see it once in a while with its eye all like this, and it would show up, but it never came back to the family, and it was always out there, and every time I encountered it, it was like, oh no, I did that. Oh God, I can't believe I did that. It's so horrible.
Wow.
It knew that. And I had never forgiven myself for that. I had never brought it out into the open. It was just like this secret sore that I had stored away because I didn't want to deal with. And that thing went just like, hey man, bing. So they can be your greatest teachers if you know how to use them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have to know what they're doing.
What buttons are they pushing, and what in there is linked to that button that they're pushing that you need to go in there and clean out.
Which makes sense of almost every mental health problem you can imagine, because it's really just a replay of unresolved stuff, isn't it?
Yes, buried alive.
Things. Yeah, good one. I like that analogy, buried alive. Do you know a guy called Clancy McKenzie? He's an American guy. I think he's American. He studies schizophrenia, and his theory, I don't know much about him. I've tried to contact him, but I've not been able to make contact. His theory is that schizophrenia is post-traumatic stress disorder from a time before the age of 2, and that what's happened is later in teenage life, it's triggered by a subsequent traumatic event. And he says this pre-2 trauma can often be simply the birth of another child, because the child's whole world is dependent on their mother. And if the mother takes their focus away from the child and to a new child before the age of 2, then you've got a situation where that first child's life is in danger, not physically, obviously, but psychically. This is his theory. How would you conceive of that? It makes sense to me. I understand it, but in the light of, spirit attachment, it's probably a bit simplistic. But
yes, I think so. I think what he did hit, and one thing I found while working in the prison, I didn't want to know what the guys I was working with, what they did, because that would color my thing. But there were times where I felt it necessary to look it up for one situation or another. And virtually all of my schizophrenic patients had suffered horrible trauma in the earlier years, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, being burned, put in closets, cigarettes being put out on them. There was this core of a nasty, ugly abuse. Right? And that was in common with many of them. I wouldn't say all of them, but many of them. And they'd say, "Oh, it's genetic." They haven't had it. They can't prove that. What I believe is happening is that once they're programmed like that, that's how they see the world. Okay, so there's all this fear of it maybe happening again, or anything that reminds them of that. So somebody who'd been abandoned by their parents, if it looks like a girlfriend or a boyfriend shows any signs that they may abandon them at all, they reject them and get out of there quick because they don't want to be hurt again. And after a while, then those thoughts become stronger and stronger because they're self-reinforcing. So what I strongly suspect is happening is that they are programmed at that frequency. Okay, so they will attract what they're programmed that, and at the lower levels like that, these entities can smell negative emotional energy like a shark smells blood. And they just move right in there and start up. So I don't think it's a genetic thing. I don't think it's a chemical thing. I think that what happens, and if I ever saw a schizophrenic mother, with a child, I would do everything I could to let Child Protective Services know that this was the case. I don't think it's a genetic thing. I think the entities create in the child the conditions on which they can feed.